All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dash, and I'm a bookseller at Women and Children First here in Chicago. We are so excited to celebrate the release of Body Language, edited by Nicole Chung and Matt Ortile. This was, I think, so far, yeah, we've all got our copies. I think so far this year, this was definitely my favorite read. So I highly recommend everyone grabbing a copy if you haven't already. I'm super excited for this conversation. It was really nice to read from so many different perspectives on how bodies just move and exist and experience the world. Yeah, just great read. Buy it, read it. You'll love it. So today, along with Nicole Chung, we are joined by Austin Gilkeson, Karissa Chen, and Maggie Tokuda-Hall. I will introduce each of these authors a little more in depth in just a moment. First, I'd like to begin our virtual event as we begin our events in store with a land acknowledgement. So please join me in acknowledging that the land on which the bookstore stands is the unceded territory of the Peoria, Potawatomi, and Miami people. There are over 75,000 Indigenous people living in Illinois, and we strive to recognize and honor Native history, literature, and community. We encourage you to learn more about land acknowledgements and about the rightful owners of the land where you are viewing tonight's event. We also strive to go beyond the words to the work by uplifting grassroots Native movements. We encourage everyone to research their local Indigenous-led land-backed organizations. For us here in Chicago, we support the ongoing projects undertaken by the American Indian Center of Chicago. And if you're in Chicago, the bookstore is open at this time. We're open for browsing Tuesday through Sunday, 11 to 6. We also offer curbside pickup that is every day from 11 to 5. And then we also ship. So if you wanted to buy something from our website, you can order that at womenandchildrenfirst.com, and we can ship anywhere in the US. And you can also find out more about future events from the website as well. We've got a calendar on there. And then just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. If you'd like to ask today's authors questions at any time, make sure you use the Ask a Question box that's going to be at the bottom of the screen rather than asking the questions in the chat. It just makes it a little easier to navigate when it comes time for the questions. And then if you're interested in purchasing Body Language from Women and Children First, you can use the Buy the Book button also towards the bottom of the screen. It's like a big green rectangle. Once again, I highly, highly recommend buying it and reading it if you haven't already. And then last thing, if you're having any technical issues, we always recommend refreshing your page first and make sure you're on the Chrome browser, which is going to be the Crowdcast preferred browser. All right, now that all that's out of the way, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guests for the night. Nicole Chung is the author of All You Can Ever Know, a memoir. She is a contributing writer at The Atlantic and the former editor-in-chief of Catapult magazine. Austin Gilkeson has written for Tin House, Foreign Policy, Vulture, The Toast, and many other publications. Karissa Chen is a writer whose work has appeared in The Atlantic, Bon Appetit, The Cut, and Catapult, among many other publications. And she currently serves as the editor-in-chief of Hyphen magazine and is currently working on a novel. Maggie Tokuda-Hall is the author of award-winning books such as Picture Books, Also an Octopus, and Love in the Library, the YA novel The Mermaid, the Witch, and the Sea, and the graphic novel Squat. All right, so with all that being said, I will let y'all take it away, and I will take myself off screen.
Thank you so much, and thank you to Women and Children First for hosting this event. I've been looking forward to it all week. I think that we're going to actually start off with some readings. So Maggie, if you could read from your essay, Little Pink Feet first.
Yeah, absolutely. Firstly, thanks for having me here today. I'm really excited to be with all of you. And thank you to the editor who worked with me on this essay, Sarah Lynn Rogers, who I believe is still with Catapult. This is Little Pink Feet. And I guess I should say there's a content warning. I don't think I'll actually get to it, but if you read the whole essay, it does talk pretty frankly about sexual assault. So if you were going to read it, just be warned that that's coming. I'm not a likely candidate for a baking hobby. I can't eat gluten. I'm married to a type 1 diabetic. In my culinary life, I have come to disregard recipes for being too bossy. So when I picked up baking, it didn't just feel sudden, it felt random. Stolen, maybe, from a better woman, a woman with no dishes in her sink. First, it was chocolate cake. It was pretty, but too simple. Then came the macarons, hundreds of them. Pale pastel treats topped with edible gold leaf and glitter. Beautiful and intricate, a worthy technical challenge to cut my teeth on. Too hard for most people, but not too hard for me. They're temperamental. That's what every recipe says. They crack, collapse, are prone to fail. Search results are dense with guides for troubleshooting your macronage. I loved making them immediately. Later, I'd realized the timing of this new obsession was no coincidence. The first time I made macarons was shortly after a miscarriage. The macarons also failed. I'd folded the batter too many times, added too much rose water, too much dye. They tasted like soap. They emerged from the oven shriveled and flat. No feet, as the ruffles at the bottom edge of the shells are called, a result gleaned from proper baking. I scraped the delicate pink remains into the trash. I was undaunted. We started fertility treatment in the summer of 2018. Tests made it clear my husband and I would not get pregnant naturally, ever. I wasn't surprised by the news. There were no obvious clues. It was just something I knew, the same way I knew I was in love, or that a recipe calls for too much salt. I didn't go into treatment with any misgivings. The fertility center we chose boasted special care for women of color, glowing Yelp reviews, and a doctor educated at both Harvard and Yale. It did not occur to me to enter this arrangement with my antennae up. And even now, if that feels naive, it doesn't feel foolish. We should be able to trust professionals with the care of our bodies. Pregnancy is going to be hard for you, the doctor told me. A signal that I was being too precious, too fussy. A gentle rebuke. I mistook it for candor. It was the beginning of a process wrought with lies by omission, choices made on my behalf but not in my best interest. My chief concern that day, the day of our first consultation, was all that medication. It was a lot, but we plowed ahead anyway. Sure, it would be hard. All pregnancies are hard. That was okay, I told myself. I can handle hard. I took a long and extreme list of medications leading up to the surgery in which my eggs would be extracted. For the entire week leading into the procedure, I was in so much pain, like menstrual cramps, but more insistent, sharper, that my life was suddenly limited. No coffee, no sex, no alcohol, no exercise, no sudden movements. These were the rules. I was constantly nauseated, forever teetering on the edge of vomit. Is this normal? I would ask. All bodies are different, the doctor would tell me. The subtext was, something is wrong with yours. Later, another doctor would name what happened to me, ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, an injury caused by overmedication. My ovaries had been pushed into such artificial productivity that they could not bear the weight of their own fruit. My surgery date was bumped up because I was growing so many eggs. I was deeply uncomfortable, but I could handle that. I could handle that for a baby. Macarons are essentially a French meringue with almond flour and powdered sugar folded into them. Their reputation is that they're difficult, but I'd argue that they just require extra attention. Get to know your oven, learn if it runs hot. Fewer folds of your macaronage is better, but too few and they'll be misshapen. Don't bake on an especially humid day if you can help it. Macarons are not hard, so much as they are particular. I think I'll stop there. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much for that reading, Maggie. Karissa, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. So this is going to be from the essay in the anthology about when I went to freeze my eggs. And thank you to Nicole, who helped me edit this piece. Okay. The first time I dreamt of you, I was in my mid-20s. In the dream, I labored for what felt like an eternity and a mere minute, time being fluid and paradoxical in dreams. And then you were pressed against my breast. I could see the tuft of dark hair plastered against your scalp. I could feel the down of your skin prickle against my cheek. Your warmth filled my greedy body with something unnameable, and I drank it in, the weight of you, all that I had not known I wanted. When I woke from the dream, it was too soon. The absence of something ghostly ached in the crook of my arms. I spent the hours after in a muted haze, an emptiness I had trouble putting a name to, until I recognized it for what it was. I missed you. It wasn't the same as longing, exactly, because it felt like deeper, sadder, more confusing, more like grief. I felt the absence of a family I'd yet to create, as if you already existed somewhere, but were not mine to have. I've had many dreams like this since. Sometimes you are a toddler, a little girl who loves dresses and climbs into my lap, chattering about a life I know instinctively includes me. Sometimes you are a boy who grows rapidly before my eyes into a young man. Sometimes you have distinct features, so known to me in the minutes after I wake that I'm certain I could pick you out of a picture. Other times you are anonymous, only a powdery smell, a soft heaviness in my arms, a giggle, a cry. In every dream, I know I am your mother, meant to love and protect you. Each time I wake, I'm filled with the same ache. I wonder each time if there's a word in the English language that means to miss and mourn someone who doesn't exist. I flew back to Taiwan the year I turned 36 for a 3-week trip I booked solely for the purpose of freezing my eggs. In the 2 weeks leading up to the first appointment, I've been taking, I'm going to mess up these names, estradiol and norethistone, normally given to alleviate symptoms of menopause, to help me regulate my cycle and prevent the formation of cysts. Cysts had been the reason I hadn't been able to start the process several months earlier. My period arrived right on schedule, 2 days ahead of my first appointment at the IVF clinic. I woke up at 6:45 that morning, jet-lagged, jittery, and under the weather. As I got dressed and headed toward the train station, I fretted. Would cold affect the efficacy of the procedure? Would I produce fewer eggs because my body was too busy fighting off a virus? I thought about taking a cocktail of vitamin C, zinc, and echinacea tablets, what I usually took when I felt myself coming down with a cold, but then worried they might somehow interact with whatever injections they were going to give me. I bought a bottle of orange juice instead. At the clinic, I was first called to have my blood drawn to test me for my hormone levels. I dutifully gave the nurse my left arm, looking away as she filled 2 tubes with blood. Afterward, I was called into another room for an ultrasound. The technician swiveled the wand around inside of me, taking pictures, drawing X's that I guess were to mark my follicles, typing in comments I tried to decipher. As I was pulling my underwear back on in the small changing room, I heard whispers, and then the technician called me back. "You have to do an outside ultrasound," she said, pouring gel on my belly. She pressed a different wand to my skin and then marked something on the screen. "Myoma," she typed. I didn't know what a myoma was, but it sounded like bad news. For the next 2 hours, I sat in the waiting room, inwardly panicking. What if they found another cyst? What if I wouldn't be able to start this round after all? I'd been counting each cycle that had gone by without egg retrieval, aware of the fact that the number of good eggs I had dwindled with each passing month. When the doctor finally called me in, I was so nervous I thought I would puke. She was a doctor I had met with months earlier, a woman with kind eyes and a slight smile. She waited until I was seated and said, "Everything looks good for us to begin." I almost burst into tears. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karissa. Austin, you're up.
All right. Can everyone hear me? All right. So thank you, everyone, for having me here this evening. And thank you to Nicole for editing this essay first when it appeared on Catapult, and then also for this anthology. So I'll be reading from my essay, Teshima. Be reading a little bit into it. When my son Liam was a toddler, his favorite Sesame Street bit was the one in which an increasingly frustrated Bert tries to tell Ernie he's got a banana in his ear, until Ernie finally shouts, "I'm sorry, you'll have to speak louder, Bert. I can't hear you. I've got a banana in my ear." Whenever he got his hands on a banana, Liam held it up to his ear and giggled, and we acted out the skit until he yelled, "Banana ear." I feel like Ernie these days, only nobody can see I've got a banana in my right ear. People call to me, and I don't hear them until they're right next to me. Sometimes I don't even hear them then, and they have to tap me on the shoulder, which scares the hell out of me. I can't tell where individual sounds come from either. You can find me in the lobby, or you could, I'm no longer at that job, of my old office building some mornings, pirouetting like a confused ballerina as I tried to figure out which elevator door had dinged open. Once in the middle of the night, my wife Ayako woke me and asked, "Did you hear that?" And like the world's most doomed horror movie protagonist, I answered, "No." A few months ago, I unknowingly ignored a clerk at Trader Joe's trying to chat at the checkout. "Not a big talker, huh?" she said when she finally caught my attention. "Sorry," I replied and shook my head. What I wanted to say was I used to be a big talker. I loved going to parties and talking people's ears off. Now I'm more reticent. I dread random conversations because my lines are always the same. "I'm sorry, could you say that again?" So often I just smile and nod, like that, and I hope I haven't agreed with or to something terrible. It's disturbing to realize that we're such changeable beings that a bit of faulty biological wiring here or there in our bodies can alter our behavior and even personality. But life with hearing loss is also familiar, in the same way Teshima was familiar. Not understanding most of what people around me are saying and not being able to fully express myself is something I had gotten used to living in Toyotama, also in Japan. Then, too, I had become adept at piecing together the meaning of a phrase from a few understood words, context, and body language. I'd found communication easier with my elementary school students, even though they understood little of my native English. Their Japanese vocabulary was limited too, though still far, far better than mine, and they conversed as much through playing as talking. One day during recess, as I was failing to explain something in my broken Japanese to a group of increasingly distracted students, a girl named Nanami snuck up behind me, lightly smacked me on the head, and then ran laughing across the field. The frustration I'd felt trying to communicate popped like a bubble as I chased after her. Here was a language I understood. I couldn't talk to those students about much, but I could play tag with them, and that was its own kind of conversation. Liam is 6 now, and so much of how he interacts, well, he's 8 now. When I wrote this, he was 6, but it's about the same. Liam is 8 now, and so much of how he interacts with Ayako and me is through play, playing with his action figures in the basement, freeze tag in the yard, or acting out wild scenarios, like the living room couch is a high cliff from which we must dive into a sea of ice cream. It can be a relief to communicate in ways beyond words. I sometimes have trouble understanding him because of my hearing loss, or because he's speaking a new tongue all his own. Like most kids his age, language is like a plaything for him. He rakes in new words in English and Japanese and then assembles stories, songs, and jokes the way he does Legos, excitedly and imaginatively, if sometimes haphazardly. The other day, I told him about krakens, the mythological sea monsters, and then the afternoon that I wrote this very passage, he came over and breathlessly told me about a new creature he dreamed up called the fire kraken that lives in a lava lake on a distant island. He spins out these tales at a dizzying speed, so fast his own mouth can barely keep up, let alone my poor left ear. I love and envy him for it. I've adjusted living with single-sided deafness over these past few years, but I still worry I won't hear something dangerous or important or adorable. And then there's the lingering fear that one morning I'll wake up and my other ear will have suddenly gone out too, and no longer be able to hear my son's voice, or his laughter, or his heartbeat, which fill me with electric joy every time I hear them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh, those are all so good. I love all your essays so much. Thank you for reading. I would love if each of you would just start out by talking about your essay in body language, as much or as little as you want to explain to the audience who won't have read the whole thing. Specifically, sort of why you felt you wanted to write this particular piece, where it came from. Maggie, can we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So Little Pink Feet ends up talking about both the way that doctors can be irresponsible with your body, and the way that that dovetails emotionally with going through sexual assault, and how similar that can feel, while still talking about baking, because it was a thing that I could control in the face of both of those things. And I think when I realized what had happened with my first IVF doctor, I was just so betrayed and like furious. There was such a sense that as soon as I started talking to other people who had gone through IVF, that so many of them had experienced similar things, and that was not part of the conversation before I had gone into it. It was only something that once, that's my 2-year-old, the IVF was ultimately successful. So,
that was flawless timing right there.
I know. So, and I got what I asked for. Sorry. It was like a secret. It was like a thing that people didn't talk about until you admitted that it was something that had happened to you. And it reminded me so much in that way of sexual assault, where it's like, it's not how you lead a conversation about dating, but if it becomes clear that somebody else has gone through it, you're more likely maybe to open up about it as well. And so I felt much more of an obligation to share this story than I have a lot of other personal things that I've gone through in my life that I feel like I don't really need to write an essay about, or that's just as good as a diary entry. Like maybe I just need to write a post-it note where I'm like, I'm mad, and that would have been sufficient. But in this case, I did feel like there was a distinct possibility that if I wrote this and it was published anywhere, that it would be likely that I would hear from other women who had experienced the same thing, and that 100% bore out to be true. And so I'm glad that I did. And that being said, it was also like a very personal and upsetting thing to write about. And every time I've done reading over Zoom is different, but like in public doing readings for this is like very strange, because you have to be ready as soon as you come off whatever, the little dais, the stage, whatever, to talk to people about this experience and their experiences of it as well. And that can be pretty heavy, but I've been really grateful for the chance to have published this essay, because personal essays are not actually my wheelhouse, really. So it was a big departure for me.
Thank you for sharing that. And just, I mean, I just want to say I really appreciate the vulnerability in this essay. And I'm sure that I'm not surprised to hear that it really resonated with so many people. I think it probably made a lot of readers feel less alone in their experiences. Austin, can you talk a little bit about your essay, sort of where it came from? And again, like, I think you and I had gotten to work together at the Toast, right? So, and we had mostly worked on some really fun, nerdy, literary, hilarious pieces together. And this essay was definitely a change. So I'd be curious to hear more about where it came from for you and why it felt important for you to write it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, as you said, and kind of echoing Maggie, personal essays aren't really my wheelhouse. But this one really kind of started with spaces in a weird sort of way. I think when we went to the Heart Archives in Japan on the island of Teshima, it was just a very profound experience. It's an incredible work of art, and what really got to me was, not only seeing my son's heartbeat turned into lightning music, is just what they do there. You record a heartbeat, and then they put it into this dark room that you go into that's full of kind of mirrored panels to reflect the light. There's this big light bulb that flashes to the heartbeat, and then the heartbeat is filling the room. So it was a really kind of profound experience, but it was also very reminiscent of as I write in the essay, of the OBGYN like room where we first heard his heartbeat, on the sonogram screen. Again, there was lights and kind of screens and mirrors, and then it was also very similar to the audiologist offices that I would go to, where they would test my hearing over and over. We're in a dark room with mirrors and a light bulb, and kind of all these weird sounds. So I guess the genesis of it was just trying to thread the needle of all these similar experiences that I've been kind of going through in a short period of time, and trying to talk about what it meant for me, and also talking about my hearing loss, and kind of, I think hearing loss, particularly when it's not full hearing loss, but when it's partial hearing loss like mine is, about half, a little more than half, is again something that I think, similar to a lot of the essays in this book, is just something that people don't really talk about a whole lot. And I've met so many people since I became half deaf that are also half deaf, or and I didn't know about it, or they now they were sharing it with me, or I connected with them because of that. And so it was really nice to kind of again express something like that, and then find people across all walks of life for whom that, was the same thing. And then, is after I kind of drafted it, and then I was like, oh, where should I send it? And I knew you were at Catapult, which had kind of just started pretty recently, I think. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna go to Nicole. So that was the genesis of it.
Thank you. Karissa, what about you?
So I wrote this piece as part of the column that we are doing, that I had been doing on kind of figuring out my fertility. You know, I had broken up with a longtime partner at 35, which kind of left me in a panic because, you know, I wanted to have a child, and I didn't know if that was going to be able to happen. And so a lot of, you know, particularly this essay was, you know, it's written, as you can tell from the first, you know, part, it's written in part directly to my unborn child that I hope to have someday. Because like, you know, I wanted to talk about this like very specific longing for a family or for a specific child that I didn't know if it was going to be in the cards for me, you know, and not be able to really control the circumstances of that. But like also talking about, well, I am doing what is in my control, which is the only thing I can do right now is to freeze my eggs. And sort of I wanted to be really candid about the process of doing that, because I know that when I was trying to figure out if this was something I wanted to do, like I didn't know what went into it exactly. Like, you know, I'd look it up on like websites and they would just be like, you do this in like a week and a half and then you go to work. And I was like, all right, sounds easy enough. And it was not easy. It was like one of the most difficult things that I had done up until that point. And I felt extremely isolated doing it, you know, especially without a partner, especially in a country that wasn't mine, without like a good support system. And so, you know, I wanted to talk about both the process of how isolating it was physically and how hard it was physically, but also about how difficult it is to wrestle with these emotions of being, you know, in your late 30s and wanting this thing and having zero control over that. So yeah, I mean, and similar to everyone else here, like I've gotten like, you know, up until now, like I still get a lot of messages from people who are like, thank you so much for writing this, because, you know, I am going through this right now. I'm freezing my eggs right now and I feel so alone, and this made me feel less alone. And so, you know, I think this just shows the power of essays that, like, you know, we've all had this experience where people want to see their experiences reflected back at them.
Thank you for sharing that, all of you. Karissa, I wanted to ask a follow-up question for you about, you mentioned this, about how the essay is addressed, at least in places, to your future child. And you weave in that part really beautifully in the piece. I mean, much of it reads like a more straightforward essay, like we're in first person, we're hearing about it from you, but then you'll shift and you'll write, like it's this intimate address. And those are like some of the most emotional and like lyrical sort of parts of the piece. I have read some examples of essays that are addressed kind of to one party before, that can sometimes, to me, just personally feel a little bit distancing, or rather, I think it can be a difficult thing to pull off, especially in a lengthier piece, but you do it so beautifully. And I was just wondering if you could talk more about how you made that decision and some of the other structural decisions about that piece. I imagine it must have been sort of even harder to approach it from a craft perspective, given just how difficult it was to write about. But how did you decide to kind of make that the heart of the piece?
So I had written like an earlier version of this essay that was more like, I guess, like a word vomit when I was like, you know, I was really struggling with this. And it did start, you know, the original version of it was just like a straight up letter to this kid that I like was devastated at not knowing if I would ever have them. And so in some ways, like that was the most honest thing that I knew how to write, because I didn't know how to write about this particular thing without sort of like writing directly to this wish, I guess, you know, like that was the manifestation of my longing, that it was like, I need to believe this is true. And the way that I can make this real is to sort of wish it into existence by directly addressing this child. And then when I went back to be, you know, to want to sort of structure it with more details and like, more specificity to the process of the egg freezing itself, I was like, but this is what it's really about. Like, it is about the process of egg freezing, but like that in itself is not what it's about for me. What it is about for me is like, what am I doing all this for? I'm doing this specifically for this wish, for this being that I hope eventually exists. So it made sense to me to start there, and to structure it like a letter in that sense, and to really sort of center and ground the, and otherwise, which is just like kind of a straightforward sort of, this is my scientific like process of what happened, into something that I felt like was why it was really, what was really driving me to write this. And I don't think that I could have finished the essay or gotten through it without feeling like I'm reminding myself why I'm doing all this. This is why I went through all of this, is for you, for this specificity of like whoever you are going to be. So that was, it felt natural to me, I guess, to structure it that way, and to write it in that particular way. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Maggie, I have a structural question for you as well, just because your piece is I think it's one of my favorite braided essays that Catapult's published. It's just
Thank
really,
you.
and I was pitched so many as an editor, and I tried to write them myself. And I know it is a difficult thing to pull off, that everybody really wants to try to pull off. So I'm just curious if that was always the plan for this particular piece. If so, like just kind of what that process was like, and how you figured out a way to weave these two, well, really three things. You mentioned fertility treatments and baking, and also assault. It's just like, it's masterfully done in this essay. So I would love to hear you talk more about that.
Yeah. I did not learn the term braided essay until after this was published, and someone was like, "Oh, I liked your braided essay," and I was like, "I'm my what?" But I had read them before. I just hadn't studied them, and I didn't have the terminology for it. And I think it had always come up for me that way, because I think it was only through, in the essay, I'm kind of coy about like, oh, I have this new hobby that I'm doing. I'm baking macarons. What I didn't say, I was like, I'm doing this like constantly. My house is a factory. I look like a crazy person. Every time you make one batch of macarons, you're making like 30 cookies. Something's going on. You're having a little mentee bee. You're doing it through cookies. And so, and it was, so much in the wake of this IVF stuff, and it was so clearly about control, and it was so clearly something that, that feeling that where your brain is doing something when the rest of you isn't invited yet. And so I was not able to talk about the stuff that had happened with me with IVF or with sexual assault, frankly, until I realized I could talk about it through this hobby, through this way that I was already sort of exercising the pain and the trauma that I had gone through. And so when I started writing it, it came out braided. Like, that was the way that it was structured from inception. I never had a version of it where it wasn't going back and forth between talking about this like incredibly intricate and careful baking activity that you do that's so particular. And I think that was why it appealed to me, was this, like, you have to respect each batch of macarons like an individual, which sounds kind of silly, but it was exactly what I was yearning, like what I had really wanted from treatment from a doctor, and just treatment in general, to be treated with care and like as an individual and as somebody who deserved to be understood and respected. And so I remember I wrote it longhand first, and it was really close in structure to the way that it is ultimately published. I think I had been sitting with what had happened for about 4 or 5 months at that point, and it was just so necessary to talk about it and to figure out how I could, I think, again, like, control it. Like, I wasn't able to talk about what had happened until I felt like I could control it, and I could control it in this braided essay form. And I think the fact that it came out in this like kind of hyper careful curated form is still a reflection of dealing with that same kind of trauma of like needing to feel like I could control it, make it into something artful and beautiful, something that proved that what I brought to the table was more powerful and more graceful and like intricate than any pain that could be done to me. And so the braided thing was just sort of an extension of what it took for me to feel like I was healing. And I remember finishing the essay and being like, okay, I'm done feeling those feelings now. I never have to feel them again. And that was not true. But it was a nice feeling while I felt it.
It would be great if it worked that way.
It would be so cool.
I'm glad that you touch on, I know that one of the, I feel like in the original web, like published version of this essay, there was something about like, I think there was something about like things you can control, right? And I'm glad that you sort of brought that up too, because I think all of your essays actually sort of take that on. Like there's expectations maybe about, like if or how you'll be able to like become a parent, or Austin like parent a certain way with a certain set of like abilities and expectations. And then there's reality. There's the reality that we end up dealing with, right? I actually think your 3 essays are like great examples of this, but honestly, the entire wonderful anthology, pretty much every piece sort of takes that on, like the question of, and it's not, it's like addressing this question of what we can and can't control. But what I love about your pieces specifically is that you're not trying to give answers that don't exist. You know, I mean, in the end, you realize there's only so much you can know, so much you can control, so much healing that is possible. And it's still important to tell the story. Austin, you already spoke a little bit about what I was going to ask you about, which is sort of the use of settings in your piece, but actually, and I'm so glad you talked about that, because one of the things I love about your piece is that you write about the heart archive, that art installation, and like tie that to parenting as well as like hearing loss in a really beautiful way. You are one of the few authors in the anthology who, when Matt and I said, do you want to revise at all, update, you were like, yes. And so I was thrilled, honestly. I'm like, oh, like an update. It's like a little bit of a sequel. But I was wondering, like, if you want to talk about like why you decided to do that, like why it felt important, and then what it was like revisiting older work and like updating it, because very rarely do we get to do that with published pieces.
Yeah. No, I was very, very happy, not only to be included in the anthology, but to be allowed to kind of go back to that piece. It's something that had meant a lot to me. It was the first personal essay I'd ever really written and had published. And so, you know, I was proud of what we had originally published, but, you know, kind of over the years, just because, you know, as my son grew older, as, you know, my relationship with my hearing loss had changed, I just, you know, something kind of, you know, bugged me when I think about it. I was like, oh, you know, that's, and I'm sure every writer has those things that you look back on. You're like, oh, I wish I could change this. I wish I could change that. And part of being a writer is, I guess, giving that up, because, you know, usually you can't. But in this case, I got that opportunity, and I was very excited because that essay does, it's kind of very close to my heart. Quite literally, it's about the heart archives and my son's heartbeat. And so I was very excited to go back and just kind of update it, because I felt rereading it after you guys had asked that I was like, oh, well, maybe it doesn't kind of push far enough. You know, maybe it needs to just go a little bit more. And so, it was very nice. It was nice going back to it. And I think, you know, in the years since, I've grown as a writer. And so it was nice to be able to kind of maybe take some old skills back to a slightly earlier piece, and apply them, and hopefully just give the essay a little bit more of a push, I guess.
Austin, I have to say I'm so impressed, because I know when I got that offer, I was like, no, down this path lies madness. Like, I can't, like, once I turn something in, I really have to like put up the guard of like, it's done and you don't get to touch it ever again. And and so I really respect like the discipline of going back and actually taking another look at it, because I think that that's a lot harder than maybe a lot of people who don't do this may realize.
It was it wasn't too bad. There's a lot of pieces that I think that I would need to just say, like, I got to leave it alone, or I'm going to turn into George Lucas and like insert, like weird alien CGI aliens singing jazz in the background. So yeah, I think for a lot of pieces, I would probably say like, no, I gotta leave it alone. But that one, I felt like I could probably, take it and do something with it a little bit more.
Man, I would like another crack at like many of my pieces. If any of my editors are listening, just I would really like that. Way better than pretending certain pieces don't exist, which is like also what I do.
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
But you get a certain number of years out, and like I don't know, all of your essays have like aged beautifully. Like they're gorgeous. I know like maybe this is the editor in me, but just sometimes reading older work, I'm like, yeah, I would like to like just kind of update this sucker. You all, Maggie, I think you mentioned, actually all of you kind of mentioned, like you all write in other genres. I actually think of you all primarily as writing in different genres as opposed to like the essay and especially the personal essay. And I'm wondering just like what it is that you wound up enjoying about it. Like what does the essay form maybe give you the opportunity to do? Why was that the form you needed to explore this idea? Because you can fictionalize anything, or you can make it into something funny or different. But like, you all chose to write personal and to like, first person and get really vulnerable with these pieces. I'm just curious, kind of what the essay form provided you an opportunity to do with these. And Karissa, can we start with you?
Yeah, sure. So it's really funny because I definitely don't think of myself as a personal essayist, but I have now been introduced by multiple people and referred to by multiple people as a primarily personal essay person, which I guess I just have written a lot of personal essays at this point, even though it is like not the thing that I'm like, I'm a novelist, but like, and I think the reason that to like kind of go at this backwards, the reason I always gravitated towards fiction before was because I think it offered a layer of protection for me, where I could explore things that I was dealing with like under the cover of like, this is fake, right? This is totally, I'm making up people, I'm putting them in situations, and I can kind of like go at it, slant wise. And I think that offers its benefits for certain things, but there are certain things that I think I just wanted to, and I want to like, deal with head on. And I think the personal essay is really different from fiction in that like, I know the events that occurred, going into with the blank page, the fear isn't like, oh, what am I going to write because I don't know what's going to happen. Like I know what's going to happen. It's happened already. I think the fear is like, well, I am trying to make sense of what happened. These random events occur to me, and how do I make myself understand so that I can make the audience understand, what has happened to me. And then there's that's the appeal of it, I think, is that like, I already have all the puzzle pieces. Now it's just trying to figure out like, well, how do I make the puzzle pieces fit? How do I make it make sense to me? And like, I kind of hate when people say like writing is therapy because therapy is therapy, but there is something therapeutic about like writing something that has happened, because like I often don't know what I've gone through until it's on the page. Like that is the way I process things, and I'm sure like a lot of writers like you feel this way. But it's like, yeah, I'm trying to make sense of the world, and the only way I can think about it all day, but the only way that a lot of times I finally make sense of it is when I've written it out. And I can't get that with fiction because, I'm hiding behind something when I'm writing fiction. So, yeah.
Austin or Maggie? Same question.
Yeah, I think Karissa got it right. It's, for me, it's not having that layer of protection. And I think for myself, when I write fiction, it tends to be, more humorous. And so there's that, layer of irony there as well, in humor. And I think for some things, I don't want that. And I do think there are things there where I've tried to write them as fiction, but at the end of the day, I feel like that I'm kind of being evasive to myself about what I'm feeling and what I'm trying to explore, trying to dig into, and that you know, approaching it from a personal standpoint and just being honest and being the I in the story can be liberating, and it's scary because it is you taking away all the walls, all the layers of protection. But at the same time, it forces me to be more honest with myself about these experiences, and not rely on my defense mechanism of humor to, you know, not talk about it as honestly as I think that it should be talked about.
I think the idea of looking at yourself like the eye of the story is so important. And I am realizing just in this conversation that I can really only write personal essays when I feel like compelled to. It's not like a practice that I have. I go through certain experiences and I'm like, oh, all of a sudden I'm personal essay rich. And then I'll go through years of like, I just don't have personal essays in me right now. And I think part of that is personal essays are the invitation to think of yourself as a character. And I like being forced. I think what it's done for me as a fiction writer is forced me to write myself as a character. And like, obviously I am the person I know best in the world, and to, you know, do all the hard character work that you do with the people that you make up. Like, why do you make decisions that don't make sense? Why do you do things that are against your best self-interest? Why did you make these messy mistakes? What are your coping mechanisms, etc.? But I will say, I don't feel that kind of like fiction is less personal. Like, I joke all the time that Squad, which is a graphic novel about teenage girls who turn into werewolves, is my memoir. Like, that's like a joke I make that's only like a little bit kidding, and only because werewolves don't exist. And I think that if I hadn't written like this personal essay even about going through sexual assault and, you know, what my personal way of coping with it, what I wanted as a result of it, which was a sense of control, I wouldn't have written Squad. I needed to have examined myself as a character first in order to write this other fictional thing. And I think that both of them end up being equally personal. They both, you know, when they came out, both of them felt like I invited everyone to come look in my underwear drawer. Like, emotionally, they're very the same that way. And even some of the themes about like being betrayed by patriarchy and feeling like, you know, these people who you've been told to trust are not trustworthy, are themes that have come up in all of my young adult work and have been addressed in ways that felt deeply, deeply personal, even in worlds with mermaids or werewolves or whatever I made up, because I have smoked a lot of pot in my life. And so, like, I don't know, I like that. To me, they just feel like flip sides of the same coin. Like, they are different ways of getting at emotional truth. Personal essays force you to look at yourself. And when you've done the hard work of looking at yourself and dealing with yourself as a character, you're more adept at making up other characters because you've done the reps, like, if that makes sense. And so, I don't know, they just feel like, you know, at some point I will hit some other kind of coming of age experience, some other sort of formative thing, and I will be personal essay rich again. And when I come back to writing fiction after that, the characters that I write will have all of that experience in them as well, because I will have had that craft experience from personal essays.
I love that. And I had not thought about it that way before. I mean, thank you all for sharing. I guess that my sort of follow-up is, you know, given that personal writing can kind of require different, not harder, just different things of you maybe than some other genres, or maybe not in Maggie's case, but I'm just curious, like, how do you sort of take care of yourself when you're writing about things that have hurt you, or that you're still just struggling to make sense of, that are like painful to talk about? If you get anxious about doing that ever, like, is there something that helps you get past it or decide to do it anyway? I don't know. I don't know if anyone would like to jump in.
I can kick it off. To me, the writing is the care. That is the care that I take with myself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not able to write about stuff like this until after I have done my therapy. Like, as you said, writing is not therapy, therapy is therapy. So, like, do my therapy, do my talk thing. And then eventually I get to the point where I feel like, okay, I understand how I can control this version of this story. Like, I understand now how this is something that I'm the boss of now, and I can make something beautiful and different out of it. And how whatever thing that happened that was so traumatic or so frightening or such betrayal is no longer the boss of that situation. And so the writing is the care. What's hard is then making the decision to be like, I would like someone to pay me for it now. And then getting strangers feedback. It's not, the editor's feedback is never what throws me. I'm always happy to work with a professional. The thing that I have learned that I need to figure out a better system for is like how to deal with talking with anyone who's read your work, who just comes up to you when in situations that you may not expect, at a cocktail party or whatever, and be like, oh, I read this thing that you wrote. Let me tell you about the time I was sexually assaulted. And you're like, I am holding a mimosa. I like wasn't ready for this right now. And it's like, it's a very, that's where the self-care thing, like, that's where I'm still learning. But the writing itself to me is so much a part of it, is part of the healing, is the healing maybe.
Yeah, I kind of feel maybe like two ways about it. Like there are times when I do feel like the writing is part of the healing. But then there are times when I've written about things and I can feel myself like physically having a reaction while I'm writing about it. Like I can feel myself like kind of going into a panic attack or something, just like putting the words on the page and like talking about the things that are hard to admit even to myself. I think that is something that has happened to me on occasion. And I think at that point in time, you know, two things happen for me, which is like, one, I know that I am approaching a truth that I need to confront. And so like, that's not necessarily the time for me, or that's not necessarily the point in the piece in which I need to back off. But I think that I do need to take a break, like me personally at that point in time. I often have to take a break from the writing itself and sort of like step away from it and give myself space to come back to it, because I know that I'm starting to approach something hard, which is something that I want to be able to push through because it suddenly feels important. There's stakes suddenly, you know, not that there weren't stakes before, but then there's something that feels like there's a meaningful stake here, which means that I should not be shying away from it. But in order to protect myself, like mentally and like, you know, having that self-care, it means like I need to step away from it and give myself, you know, it may be something like half a day. It could be like weeks. It could be months, you know. I have essays that I've never published because they are, I get to a point where I'm like, this is actually really too difficult for me to push through. And like, maybe there will be a point someday where I can sort of get it to the place where it needs to be. But I know that for my best interests, I need to kind of get away from it until I can, where it's not so sharp, you know, where I can kind of work through it and have the clarity as, you know, a writer and like, you know, self-editor that I need in order to make this more than just like an emo blog entry, you know? So yeah, but like, you know, so I think that there's both, because there are times when I write and I'm just like, oh, I feel like so much better now that I've written this because it's out there on the page. But then there are definitely times where it's like, this is really heavy. This is really hard. Like I need to step away from it. And like, and I think that is like the point at which like, you know, I might move into working on some other project, whether it be fiction or another personal essay, or just like do something totally different, you know, that I find healing or soothing.
Yeah, I think for me, kind of, yeah, I agree with Maggie that the story is the care. In a lot of ways, the writing is the care. And I think for me, it's to help myself understand it, and to, because I'm a writer, we're all writers. And I think we understand things best through stories, through narratives. And, you know, if I can create a narrative out of that experience, it helps me understand what I've been through, and what I'm going through and how I understand it. So it's, yeah, for me, it's almost like, you know, in therapy, a lot of times there's, you know, it's like you kind of create this scenario through which you understand, you know, depression or anxiety or whatever you're going through. And I think again, therapy is therapy, but I think this is another way of doing that. It's a way of creating the story that you tell yourself about an experience, in my case, hearing loss, and what it means to me. So yeah, I would say that would be the case for me. It's my way of hopefully just understanding the situation and having a story, not only to tell others about it, but to tell myself.
I just appreciate too all the shout outs to therapy. I mean, sorry, but it's true. Like I had like one more week on my next book and it wouldn't exist without my therapist, which I told her. But I mean, thank you all for sharing that. I have one more question, and then audience members, if anyone wants to pop one into the question box, it's not too late. But I wanted to ask you all about writing community, just because community has been so important to me as a writer. And there's so many different ways that you can have writing community, especially, I guess, now when so many things are distanced. But it feels worthwhile to talk about because there's a whole group of us. And also an anthology brings so many different voices together. So I would love to hear if you want to share like just what writing community has meant to each of you and how it's helped or like, contributed to your work. And anyone can go first.
I can go first. So writing community is like everything to me. Having a community of people that I feel like I can trust with my work. And also, especially for me, I think finding an Asian American writing community has been really important. I went to like a private college with like young Asian professionals who all went to like banking or like, they were all lawyers, and I was like the odd person. I was like, I'm going to be a writer. And I think up until that point, I was like, wow, there's like nobody like me. And I felt very isolated. And, it was when I went to grad school and like met other writers. And then like later, I started going to Asian American writing workshop events and things and Kundima and things like that. And I was like, oh, there are like people who like understand the neuroses of like needing to write things down and like needing to, like get the, work through things on the page like this. And there are people who, care about literature and art and, specifically like being a person of color, like having that specific lens to work towards things. I think it was, has really changed the way that I write, the way that I think about who I'm writing for. Being really isolated as a writer when I was just doing it by myself, it was like, oh, I'm just writing for me. And like, what does that mean? And so then I was trying to emulate like the writers I had grown up with, which were like largely like, Sweet Valley High, like, like white women. And then, having broadened that sort of perspective of like, oh, wait, there's a whole community of people who look like me, who think like me, has really changed the way that I think about my writing and like who it's writing for. I still primarily, think about I'm writing towards myself and like the person that, the pieces that I need, if I were someone out there in the world. But I think that like that version of me has sort of transformed into like, there's all these people out there who might be that version of me. And so that, having that out there and having the support of people that I've met throughout the years, I think it really, I don't think that my writing would exist without community. And it's funny because people always say like writers are, writing is a solitary act, which it is, but I really don't, I'm very conscious of like where I am in the community and like how much debt I owe to the community of people who come before me and hopefully, the writers that come after me and also all my peers. So yeah, thank you so much for asking that question because I feel like that is just so important, having that community.
I agree. It's everything. I mean, I do consider writing really solitary. I'm really protective about how many people I let see work because I have the disposition of a golden retriever. So I just can't have that many cooks in the kitchen. I have to be like, because I want to make everyone happy. And that's just not a way to work in this line. And so like, this event's actually like a crazy example. Austin is one of 2 beta readers on the sequel to my next, for my young adult novel, because he had read the book. And when he was kind enough to give me compliments about it, I was like, oh, he liked the things that I was proud of in this book. And so we have never met in real life. This is the first time I've seen Austin's face. He is 50% of the people other than my editor who took a look at that book, because he was somebody whose opinion I trusted, because clearly the things that he valued were things that I wanted to still honor with the sequel. And so writing is so funny like that. And I love finding such specific friends that way. There are certain people who I will go to when I'm having plot problems and I just want to get on the phone and talk it out with somebody. There are people who I send a personal essay to. There are people who I just vent industry feelings with, and when we get together, we get a drink and we talk shit. And like, there's so many different ways for writing community to be supportive and for you to feel less alone in a job that is, I should say, the dream job. Like, to get to, you know, be supporting yourself with writing is the dream. Like, that's incredible. But you are a person who's sitting in your underpants making stuff up if you're a fiction writer. And that can be kind of lonely. And it can be kind of hard to tell when you've been too long in the monkey house. And it's so wonderful to have so many people that you can talk to about these things. Like tomorrow, the thing that I've been looking forward to most for like the last month is grabbing ice cream with 3 of my writer friends, because one of them's in town for their book tour and I haven't seen them in months, and we're all going to get together and we probably won't even talk about writing, but who cares? It's like, that's just as much a part of my writing community, that sense of here are these other weirdos who also sit around in their underpants and make stuff up. And we're all going to get together and have a nice time and eat some ice cream outdoors. It's like, I don't know, it feels very like, in a way that I never achieved in elementary school, middle school, high school, or even college, of like having found your tribe, of finding the people that you fit in with best and the people who get you. And sometimes like it is working, like meeting up with other like mixed Asian creators has been like really important to me. And sometimes it's other young adult people, sometimes it's other science fiction, fantasy people, whatever it is. There's all these little niches that writing puts you into. And it's been so gratifying and wonderful to find the people who share those niches with you, and realizing that some of your favorite working writers also become some of your closest friends is pretty dreamy. Like, didn't see that coming. Thought it would feel a lot more competitive, like thought people wouldn't be as nice, but no, it's pretty great. Just hang out with people whose work I really like. It's very cool.
Okay, I love all this, and I love that Austin's your beta reader. Like that is
Yeah, it's our first time seeing each other's faces.
It's great. Buy the sequel when it comes out. It's an amazing book. I loved it. It's fantastic.
Oh,
Austin, if you have anything to add, it's great. I don't want to put you on the spot, but
Yeah, just I mean, I agree with Chris and Maggie. It's everything. And it's been so heartening. And Twitter and the internet are places of horror and monstrosity, but at the same time, there's great community that wouldn't be possible otherwise. You know, with this event and so many events where we're so scattered, and especially during the pandemic, we're all able to continue those relationships even virtually. And you know, when Maggie reached out, I was like, oh, can you beta read the sequel? I was like, yes, that's awesome. And it was so heartening, because you know, it's like someone trusted me with their work to read it. And it is, again, fantastic, so please buy it when it comes out. And you know, the same I think with you, Nicole. You know, I was just having people you trust with your writing is important. And you know, I know that I can email you either a very personal essay about hearing loss and my son, or I can email you a pitch for something about people dying in very metal ways in Lord of the Rings. And either one, you'll be like, yes, I will edit that. And I think having those relationships across the board, and kind of what Maggie said, there's a lot of overlap. Like this, you know, we're both in this anthology about personal essays, but you know, I read her young adult novel Mermaid, Witch, and the Sea, and then you know, beta read the sequel. And you know, I know all of us are, as we said, we're writing in these different genres, and I think that's kind of how writing is these days. There's very few people, I think, who are either, you know, up and coming or established, who are you know, it's not that thing where you only write sci-fi, or you only write middle grade, or you only write YA, or you only write literary fiction, or only write memoir. Everybody's kind of all over the place, and I think that makes the community even more important, because it's really so mixed together everywhere.
Well, thank you, the three of you, so much for being here. I'm sorry Taylor could not join us, but it was really lovely to see all of you, and I could talk to you all night. Obviously, we are 5 minutes over. Sorry to everyone, but I will throw it back to Women and Children First, and just thank you all again so much for trusting us with your words, for letting us include you in our anthology, and for being here tonight. It was such a treat.
All right. Hi again. Thank you, Nicole, Austin, Karissa, and Maggie for being here tonight. And thank you to everyone who joined us. Just a reminder that the recording will be emailed to everyone, I believe tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow. And then I'll once again encourage everyone to buy the book. There's the button down below. Otherwise, you can always purchase it at womenandchildrenfirst.com, or stop in the store if you're in Chicago. And yeah, thank you again to everyone, and I hope everyone has a good night.
Dash, thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.